Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend, I'm with eLearning Brothers. Today we're going to be talking about learning strategy and organizational development services that our eLearning Brothers custom team is offering. This webinar will be recorded. We'll get a copy posted on our blog later in the week, and we'll also be emailing a copy of this webinar to everyone who has registered. So, if something happens a little too fast and you need a refresher, you'll have this to review and access. You'll also be able to use this to show those that you may need to influence one way or the other with some of our information and help you get what you need. If you have questions during the webinar, we'll be ready to answer your questions in that questions panel, so please do use that questions panel and we'll try to get to as many of the questions as we can. Just so you know, one of the things that we like to do after the webinar is try to follow up as soon as possible. Sometimes it's just to get feedback. Most of the time we would like to get some one-on-one clarification or give one-on-one clarification on our webinar topics after the fact as it's needed. All right, so to talk to us about learning strategy and organizational development services, we have Richard Vass, Studio Director here at eLearning Brothers, and Dr. Marty Rosenheck, Director of Talent Development and Consulting with us today, or Development Consulting with us today. Thank you for joining us, both of you. I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you, Rich, to introduce our topic.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, and welcome, everybody. It's great to be with you today. Marty and I are both excited to introduce this topic to you. Some of you may not be aware that our custom team, which has actually been around since 2012, so going on 7 years now, really started out just providing, well, eLearning Brothers as a company started out providing digital assets, templates that many of you have used for various projects. If some of you may have been following us back in 2009 when we first started, so it's 10 years now that we've been in business. The custom team came along in 2012, started doing some amazing e-learning for our clients. And then just recently, over the last year or so, we've really dialed in our offerings to now include learning strategy and organizational development services. Some of you may know Dr. Marty Rosenheck. Marty's coming at you live from Chicago area. And I'm here at our corporate headquarters in Salt Lake City. Marty joined our team last year. If you look him up on LinkedIn, you'll see that many of his years in his professional career have been building his business called Cognitive Advisors. eLearning Brothers acquired that business last year. Marty was gracious enough to come join us and become part of adding more to what we're able to provide to our clients. So here at the beginning of the year, we thought it would be awesome to have some discussion around this new service that we're providing and show you some examples of work we've already done with some clients and introduce a model to you that could benefit your own organization. So Marty and I'll kind of be talking as we go here. Marty, am I coming through loud and clear to you, by the way?
You are. Thanks.
Okay.
It's great.
Yeah. And I hope you're staying warm over there in Chicago. I get worried about you guys. Coldest I ever was in my life was in Chicago.
It's kind of slushy around here today. Kind of slushy, so not too bad.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah, it's great. It's great, and thanks, and also thanks, Rich. It's great to be part of eLearning Brothers because now what's nice is that we kind of can provide the whole gamut of services and start from really, thinking about the whole thing, and I think that's a way we can help people. So I'm excited to be able to be part of this and be able to share some of this stuff with you guys.
Great. And so, Marty, I think we'll let you take it away, and then I'll just jump in as we're kind of talking, and we'll kind of just conversate a little bit here as we're sharing some of this model. We do have some poll questions along the way. We'd like to get your engagement for all of you who are participating on the webinar today. And so we'll make the most of this hour to hopefully enlighten and inform and give you something that you can take back to your organizations and make a difference. So,
yeah, that's great. Thanks, Rich. And also feel free to ask questions by typing them in, and then Andrew will be monitoring that, and he'll I'll stop once in a while and he'll read out questions. Or Andrew or Rich, if you see a bunch of questions, you can say, hey, you got some, and I'll stop. Okay, so great. I'm excited to get going on learning strategy and organizational development services and looking at kind of the big picture and how that fits and ties down, and want to share with you some ideas and ways that we think about this type of thing. So let's start with one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite guys. I'm actually in Chicago, but from New York, Yogi Berra. And if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. And I think that's true. So we got to figure out where we're going. But there's another big piece too, and that is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And my point about this is that, no matter how great a particular piece, an e-learning program is, coaching program, any one program is, it doesn't really work by itself. It only works in a context, okay? So here's an example of this too. Okay, what is this? Okay, looks like some kind of smudges and dots.
It's kind of blurry.
Yeah. Oh, what's this? It's a face made up of dots. Some people can guess probably. If you can guess who this is, what this is already, you can put it in the comments area. Okay, so we just saw the eye. So we saw a little part that's a whole of a face, but this face is just a part of this entire picture, which happens to be in Chicago in the Art Museum, Art Institute of Chicago, but George Seurat. So again, here you got lots of little dots, right? Each little dot is not much, and even one little face is kind of nice, like a great little e-learning program. It's great, but the whole thing, when it comes together, all the pieces together, that's when you really get the impact, and this is a great impact. Okay?
Kelly got it right, by the way, Marty. She knew what it was, so nice job.
All right,
Kelly.
Here we go.
I do want to point out, so oftentimes, I started my career as an instructional designer, good heavens, 20-something years ago, actually working for Discover Card, back when they were owned by Dean Witter. And then, of course, Morgan Stanley bought them out, then they became their own organization. Learned a lot in that role over many years, and saw often that really so many times we just jump right into designer development, right? So we get a mandate from on high to roll some new learning solution out, and we don't really get to think about it strategically. Where does it fit within the organization as a whole? A lot of us may be in that boat in our world today. So it's part of why this new offering is become available from eLearning Brothers, is to help add some clarity and crystallize our own thinking, so that, just like you were saying, Marty, we're able to get a greater sense of the whole rather than just pieces of it, that sometimes we just find ourselves sort of in the thick of thin things as opposed to getting into the real meat of it.
Yeah, so to that end, so what we've done is come up with a systematic way to do that. And this is kind of a learning strategy template, or actually been starting to develop this over the past months, and as a way of kind of formalizing the stuff we've been doing for a long time. But I think what might be useful for you is that it might provide kind of a systematic way to look at the big picture. And sometimes it feels overwhelming to do that, but if you break it down in a systematic way, then you can do that. And so I'm going to kind of share with you this template that you're free to use, and kind of what we do, and we can always help with any pieces of this too. So of course, any of this starts with the employee in the center. Okay, that's a critical piece. And so we want to look at how do we support the employee in providing the results. Okay, it's the employee who does the performance, and then how do we provide the enable that employee to do that? That's the one way to look at that. Okay. And this, of course, applies to volunteers if you're in a volunteer organization. But the person who's doing the job, that's where the rubber meets the road. So they have to get the results, the performance, and enablement. And then kind of, as you'll see, I'm building this matrix here. And the important pieces are the key stakeholders and how do they relate to those results and performance enablement. What kind of guidance, in other words, what direction do we need to go in each of these areas? What are the drivers? And you can see the main driver of performance, if you can look at this axis here, is our employees. Okay, and then how do you support each of these? Okay, and that's kind of a systematic way. I kind of got the idea of doing this from that. I don't know if any of you have heard of the business model canvas, and which is really cool thinking about businesses. And then colleagues of ours, and we've worked with an adaptation of that for learning ecosystems. Although for me, that whole canvas thing is a little not as organized as I'd liked it, so I kind of built this template in this kind of more organized way. So let's take a look at that, and we'll give you examples along the way. So first of all, let's look under the results column. So the people who you need to talk to find out, okay, what results you need, because we got to start with results. And we know this, we all know this, but we just sometimes, as Rich was saying, we kind of dive into a request instead of saying, okay, what do the executives really care about? What are and then the guidance is, what are the goals of the organization, and what's the strategy, and what's the value that needs to be added? That's a critical piece. We need to make sure that every little thing that we're doing is tying into that, okay? Because And the more we do that, the more valued we are as learning and development professionals to the organization. And those goals and creating those values are driven through, the drivers for that are the outcomes, okay? And the employees are the ones who are going to help create those outcomes. So you can see how it fits together. And then the support for that, how do you know if you got those outcomes? That's the measurement and analytics. Okay, I'm going to give examples of all these in a moment. So then there's the performance piece of it. So the stakeholders related to performance are two ends of the spectrum. One is our end customers. It could be the outside external customer, or it could be internal customers who are going to, we're doing whatever we're doing for. And then there's the people who define what it is that we got to do and how best to do it. And those are the experts or master practitioners. Those are the stakeholders. We need to figure out what do we need to do. And from that, from the master practitioners, for example, we need to know what proficiencies do we need? What's the knowledge and skills that the employees need in order to be able to provide those outcomes? And then how are they going to get support? And the key supporter for employees is, or should be, the manager, coaches, and peers. The manager providing that's a big part of the manager's role, or it should be, and we need to talk about that a little bit more in the future, and how do we support that process. Then this last column is the enablement that enables all this, okay? And that's us, the learning development and technology professionals. We're the ones who are the stakeholders in enabling this, okay? And then how do we provide that guidance, okay, for achieving those proficiencies and knowledge and skills that are going to meet those goals? Well, we kind of create some kind of set of learning paths, and I like to think of learning paths. And I don't know if you saw, if you haven't, it's online. Steve Rosenbaum, who wrote the book called Learning Paths, just did a presentation last week, I believe it was, or it was the week before, on learning paths. But the point is, it's not just one learning activity, but it's a whole path that leads to proficiency. Okay, and that the learning path is made up of learning experiences, okay, of various types, and learning by doing and having experiences and feedback is a critical piece of this. And then they're supported by the content and tools that support that whole process and the performance support of the job. So that's kind of one way of looking at this. By the way, just really quickly too, one thing about my background is I come from a cognitive science background. That's what I studied, how people develop expertise. And I think about that a lot. And how do you set that context up to provide expertise to provide those outcomes? And that's kind of that's a lot of what frames some of what we're doing here. Now, so this is kind of the template. I did it quickly now, but I will go into each of these and show examples of these. Okay, is that making sense so far? Did any questions pop up yet?
Nothing yet that I'm seeing on the panels. Marty, I wanted to make the point that the strategy. So this template, and we will make it available. There's been some questions of where can folks find this template. We'll make it available to you to help you kind of get that bigger picture perspective inside of your day-to-day. The reason we're kind of sharing this information with you now and introducing this as a new service from our custom division is because the idea would be that oftentimes you find yourself so mired in just working as hard as you can on that enablement piece, right? Just building those learning experiences. Sometimes it's very difficult to figure out how they're tracking back to the right goals, the right strategy, the right outcomes. And we oftentimes I don't think, in my experience, take the time to really think about that. And there is power, and we'll talk about that as we share some examples today. There is power in that big picture overview. So just like we were looking at the picnic in the park, the Sunday in the park picture, if we understand how what we're doing fits into the bigger strategy, then it gives us a whole lot more lift throughout the organization within our roles. So
yeah, and Rich, I agree. And and the thing is, we all know that we got to do this. This is not like new stuff. But the question is how to make it simpler and more systematic, and that's kind of what we want to help to do, because we know we got to do it, but it's sometimes we get so caught up it's hard to do it. I want to also share. There's another piece. There's another few pieces to this. This is the kind of overall framework, but then there's an infrastructure that supports all that, and a lot of that right now, in terms especially of digital economy, is what we call the digital technology ecosystem. What are the technologies and the digital technologies, and this is changing a lot. But how do we make sure we support this process? Because we can do things now that we couldn't do before because of the digital technologies. Everything from learning experience managers, from things beyond the LMS, to social to mobile, all kinds of technologies, VR, AR, etc. So how do we kind of put that together in a systematic place that's going to support those results? And then what's the context? Because all this happens within the context, and it's critical. Okay, so the culture, the organization, and the environment that you're in. Again, we'll go into this a little bit more, but that you can't leave that out, and we got to make sure we take into account, especially the culture. Because, for example, if managers are going to be coaches, well, the culture has to support that, for example. And then underlying this in our methodologies for kind of doing this, and this is an important part, so this idea of design thinking. Hopefully some of you have heard of this, and it's a method we use a lot when we work with organizations and create workshops to come up with the strategy. It's this design thinking process which enables that, being agile and flexible and making changes, systems thinking of the entire thing as a system in a dynamic way, basing everything on learning science, on real evidence on how people learn in cognitive science research. And then all that come together is what I call and do workshops on called learning experience design, thinking about how do you design those learning experiences. So those are all things that come in, and this is a lot, but it's in a systematic way. And now what we're going to do is share some pieces of it. So here we go. Ready to dive in?
I think we got a poll question coming up here.
That's right. Before that,
here we go. So this one will be about really take a minute if you wouldn't mind and tell us what best describes your organization's learning strategy. And I realize there could be a lot of nuances to that question, and you may feel like it's that fourth one. We really don't have one. We don't really have a learning strategy. People got to know stuff, and we get a request, and then we kick it out. So,
all right, let's see what people are saying.
All right, that poll's on the screen. If you haven't voted, now's your last chance. We'll give you a couple more seconds. Just go ahead and click right on the screen as to which one you'd like to vote for. Looks like a good chunk of you have voted. We'll give you 3 more seconds. And here's those results. So 47% of our audience said splintered. Different groups seem to have competing ideas. 20% of the audience said it's a strong, supported from the top down. Another 20% said articulated but not consistently executed. And 13% of the audience said we don't really have one.
These results look typical to me, Marty. What do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting split. It's very interesting. Okay, well, good. Well, let's see if we'll move those numbers up. Okay, let's take a look at this. So,
just to note, Beth Ann made a good point. It'd be interesting to break that out by industry.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know. Well, I mean, that's probably a whole different topic, but that is an interesting question. To break it out by industry and what that would look like based on the where you work and what sector you're in.
Well, industry, and also there's also things about kind of in terms of most successful companies, and there's been some like Burson and ATD have done some of that too, and those who are most successful tend to have a strategy, a coherent strategy in place, and have that as a coordinated way. Okay, so now I'm going to focus in first on this one here. The main reason is because this is where we've come from in eLearning Brothers, and that's where a lot of us focus is on these learning experiences, doing the eLearning, that kind of thing. So I'm going to start there, but then I'm going to come back to the rest. So the eLearning experiences, these are the kind of the things that we do, but they're all supported by everything else that's here, and this is a lot that eLearning Brothers does. For example, eLearning courses, instructor-led, etc. Rich, I'm going to let you kind of show a couple examples of those, just to say where we're coming from, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, some of you know us for some of these things. Marty, if you want to launch that next screen, we can kind of show some examples of these. These are courses that we've done for a variety of our clients. Walmart has come to us to build some custom e-learning. So here's an example of that. Other clients that we typically provide service for at any given time. Our team, our custom team, is running about 40 to 50 custom projects for our clients. Marty, hit those next 3 screenshots as well, if you wouldn't mind. This is another client that we've done some work for. You can see some examples of the type of work we do from an e-learning perspective. Click here, explore here. That's really what our custom team is really all about. And again, it's just that one small piece, right, that Marty was just showcasing. It's just those learning experiences are typically what we have provided. VR is a new piece for us. This last screen here, we're not going to spend a ton of time on this webinar talking about our custom solutions, but this one's been exciting. So we've just done a virtual reality project for AAA National. Very cool project where the learners have to put on their headset. They're young drivers just becoming certified or trying to get their driver's licenses. And as they look around, as they're driving down the road, they have to react to road signs and respond quickly to what they're seeing based on the signage along the road, so they get feedback as they go. So these types of solutions are typically what we're building as we're providing learning experiences for our clients. And probably there's nothing here that is unusual or different from what you probably are doing in your own world. So that's kind of a little snapshot of some of the work we're doing in terms of building learning experiences.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, it's great stuff. So what I want to do is I'm going to show you another example. In this example, we're going to walk through the whole learning strategy piece. So here we go. And I'm going to show this example with a client, an early client of ours called Water Quality Association. They're basically an association whose member companies install and service water softening and water purification equipment out in the field. Okay, and so they needed a solution well, and you'll see exactly what they needed. But we went through this entire process that I'm going to show you, that I'm sharing with you. Now, it wasn't actually written out in this way before, and I went back and said, yeah, this is what we've done. So it's kind of taking sort of the process that we've used and making it more, and looking at and explaining it in a systematic way. So I'm going to use that as the example. So we created for them what they call a modular education program that had a bunch of components, sort of basics and fundamentals that everybody took. They had a core learning paths and curriculum for sales representatives, for water specialists who are designing water systems, okay, installers and service techs. And then they had advanced programs. This was done over a period of time, and we actually did all the preparation and design and development with them and for them on this. So this is a good example of the entire process. So let's walk through the process with them. So for example, first thing is we want to start from the top, because we did this. We needed to talk with their executives and ask questions like, who are the leaders, first of all, who care about these results? Who are the people to talk to? Because you got to talk to the right people who care. In this case, it was the association's board of directors. We met with them, the executive director of the association, the owners of the member companies and their executives, okay, and then the education director as well. Those were the key kind of stakeholders that we had to get. What is their vision? What do they want? And basically, what are their goals? And what's their strategy? And what's the value that can be added by this? So we asked them those questions. What results do they care about? And the answers they got were things like they want to increase the professionalism of the field, because water quality industry is was kind of not as well organized, and sometimes some areas had a not great reputation, and they want to say, hey, these people are well-trained professionals. They want to have credibility with state regulators, because the state regulators, there was a little bit of a turf battle with plumbers, for example, and things like that, and so they want to make sure that state regulators see what they're doing and as a credible profession, basically. And then the company owners wanted to make sure that they can hire people and get help in actually getting them certified and up to speed quickly, okay? And then the association wanted adoption, members to actually adopt the program, and they actually made, we sold this program to the member companies. Okay.
Marty, one of our attendees, Stephanie, made a good comment just now in the panel where she said, she'd be interested in knowing how is this strategy received by companies who think that, learning is really just about PowerPoint, right? So as a practitioner, she's saying one of the greatest challenges is really educating stakeholders on why all of this vision is important. And yes, you're pointing that out now, I think.
Yeah,
when you're talking about what is it that is important to the stakeholders, what is guiding them from a goals and strategy and value, what are the outcomes? I mean, if we haven't had any thoughts around these, I feel like, and I've seen it happen, and probably many of you have as well, we're in danger of rolling out some training solution that'll just be the flavor of the month. So the things you're talking about now, I think, are speaking to the heart of what Stephanie was bringing up here.
Well, Stephanie, and I do a whole thing on this too, but the point of it is, and I know it's hard to sometimes get this across, but the fact is, people do not learn, and there's good research on this, just by being presented information. PowerPoint, yeah, actually I have a name for that. I wrote an article about that. It's called Avoiding Death by PowerPoint, okay? So in other words, you can do it, but it's not going to work. And then eventually they're going to figure that out, and then they're going to say, well, we need another training or something. So it is about educating, I think, people. And when you think about it, one of the things I ask, here's a question I ask them. I ask a lot of people. I'll ask you this right now. Think about this, okay? Okay, think about something you're really good at, a skill that you're excellent at, something that you do well. It could be work related or not. Okay, now we don't have a poll question set up, but think about this. How many of you how have you learned that? How many of you have learned that by taking an e-learning course on it, or by sitting in a course, or how many of you learned it through experience and feedback and trying it and making mistakes? Any important skill, that's how we learn those things. And there's good evidence from cognitive science research and a lot of research on that. So that's one of the things. And also, are we going to focus on the learning experiences? Or are we going to focus on them only as a means to getting these outcomes? That's the critical thing. You want these outcomes. And so and by the way, sometimes the act of talking to the leaders, it has two purposes. One is to get the information, and two is to actually get buy-in and get them involved in the process and get buy-in in the process. So there's two. When we do that, we work with organizations. And by the way, sometimes I'm brought into organizations to help present to their leadership and show them and help them understand why we need to shift the way we're doing our learning. And a lot are starting to get that now. So for example, with outcomes, what are the outcomes that would drive those achievements? Okay, in their case, it was increased market share. State getting recognized by different states. As a matter of fact, the state of Colorado, as a result of this curriculum, made that curriculum the official set of requirements for this industry in Colorado, and others are starting to move that direction. Can they pass the certification exams? Is it membership growing? Those are some of the things. And then how do we measure those things? What are the measures? Because how do we know whether we got to those outcomes? That's things like increased speed to proficiency. So what's a base? This is one of my favorite ones. What's the baseline of time it takes to get proficient? Okay, how long has it taken, and how long does it take for an employee to get proficient now after this? How many states recognize it? Number of certified employees. All these are some of the metrics you got to get meaningful metrics and figure ways of getting those, because that's how you prove to the leaders that what you're doing makes sense. And I want to talk for a second about this speed to proficiency, because I think that's a great one that's underused, especially for newer skills or new people. How long does it take? So here's a great ROI right here. It's not about how long the training is. It's how long till they get proficient. And proficient means they can do their job on their own. Okay, so if you can set up a systematic learning path in a systematic way that moves that arrow and increases proficiency and get proficiency in a shorter time, that is a huge savings. If it's a sales rep, think about if they can be up to quota that much more quickly, how much money that's going to save, that's going to generate. Or a repair person, a service tech. If the first time repair rate, if they can get out and be able to repair things without mistakes much earlier, that makes a huge difference. And that's that ROI. So that's an example of one of the measures that I think is underused and really can be used more effectively. And we can talk more about that. Happy to talk more about that in another time. Okay, so we got this kind of this results column here. Let's go on now to the performance piece. Okay. So one of the things we want to do is look at the customers and master practitioners. And there's two kind of angles. Customers is like, what do our end users really need and want? Okay, our customers, that's one piece of it. I'm going to focus right now, though, on the master practitioners who say, here are the ones who can tell us what does good look like, and get at their implicit knowledge of how do you do things and how are things done. You got to find not just like the theoretical experts, but the people who are doing this job better than anybody else. Kind of like who's the best performers, and we want to clone them. And we have methodologies, actually a whole systematic methodology based on cognitive science that we do. It's called knowledge harvesting that gets at this implicit knowledge. So for example, and we want to get the proficiencies and the skills and knowledge. And this is an example with this organization where we got some of the experts in a room and started having them organize, say, well, what are all the kinds of things you handle? Okay, and put them all out. And first they always say, oh, it's an infinite number. They say, okay, let's go, okay, but write them all down. And then we categorize them. And it turns out they can be organized into a very finite set of categories. And those categories vary by different parameters. And that defines both what does good look like and also the learning path. Because now here's the situation someone has to handle. And this kind of gives input into that. And this was a core piece of building the curriculum. Okay, and then also, what are the goals? What are the proficiencies we need? So those proficiency statements came out. So for example, for each of these things, which we represented as badges, water diagnosis, so, solutions. They were what we call competence. Instead of competency, we like to call it competence. What should you be able to do? Okay, and then what are the proficiencies that you should have, the things you're able to do, and and everything that was guided towards these, because they all systematically lead up to the results that we want. Okay, so that's a critical piece. Start with what are the real things that people should be able to do. It's not really so much to what do they know or can they pass a test. Can they do these things? Can they actually read a water test? Can they interpret the test? Can they talk to a customer about it? Can they identify? Those are the kinds of things that you want to get at, and that's what the focus of the learning needs to be. Okay. All right. Now the employee is the center, and that's the thing, because we have to make sure that whatever we do and however we do it, it works for that employee. Okay, that's critical. So this is where some of the design thinking and employee-centered work comes in. Okay, you want to, we got this nice rock star here, but if you want to be a rock star, we got to really empathize with that employee. How is this person right here feeling, by the way? I don't know. What do you think, Rich? But there are ways to do that through focus groups, through observation, ride-alongs with them, and we did that. We talked to both managers and employees, rode along. We went out. It was invaluable to actually see what they do on the job. Okay, that's critical. And then from the design thinking and user experience components of things, you want to say what from the employee you want to look at. What are their goals? Because you really have to get at that. Because if you don't meet them, you can do the greatest thing and they just won't do it or won't pay attention to it. What's their previous experience though, and the level of expertise that they have, and you got to tailor things to that, or make it so that they can easily self-tailor to that. Okay, and that's where adaptive learning comes in, things like that. What are their motivations? Not just extrinsic, but what do they care about? What's really going to motivate them? And what am I feeling? What are they going to do this when it's over? Getting that information, it takes time, I know. But if you can do that, you're much more likely to get something that will actually work. I don't know where that came from. Let's see. There we go. So now,
I think encouraging some points that have been brought up on the panel, and I think this usually comes up as we've been introducing this new service here at eLearning Brothers Custom. The question often comes up: we really don't have time to do all of that. And I think all of us who are learning professionals on this session today would say, we can't afford not to do that, especially within the learning organization that we're all, various entities that we're all part of. It really is where the value is communicated. And some of the points that are being made as we're kind of talking here, I'm following the chatter on the questions panel, is how do we make sure we're linking metrics to what's actually happening? And it's this stuff right here that Marty's describing, right? Marty, it's these kinds of things that allow us to get a picture into the heads of our learners, which then drive all the way back up the food chain to strategic vision and goals and values that are set by stakeholders at the very top. So our ability to be able to really dial in on it, I think, elevates our whole practice and everything that we're trying to do as learning professionals.
Yeah, it's an investment, and you have to show the ROI of that investment, in the sense that it's got to pay off in results, not just in butts and seats, how much training did you do, but how much does it make an effect? Now, riding along, I want to tell you one story about this that I think really illustrates it really well. It's kind of, that's me, by the way, up there. And I'll tell you the story behind this picture. It's with another client, but it's actually a company that does, it was for training linemen, people who climb up on the telephone poles, not telephone poles, but the electric poles, okay? They had to be trained. A lot of their people were retiring and who were really expert. And this is the kind of job that you got to do well. It's very hard, and if you make a mistake, you touch the wrong thing, you're fried. I mean, safety and all that stuff is really, really critical. So I was working with this one expert who's going to be retiring soon, in a couple of years probably, but he was very skeptical, because I wanted to really understand and talk with him and get an idea of what's going on, and he didn't really want to talk to me at first. And it was important. So one of the things I said is, okay, I'll make you a deal. I'll tell you right now, I'm afraid of heights. I have vertigo, okay? And if you work with me, I will climb a pole, okay? And I was like, what did I say? But this is the dedication to the job we all have, I know, right? So he gave me, so he said, they have these special boots that have little hooks on the bottom of them so you can climb the pole. So I went there and I said, I was like, the next week I went there and I was really scared, to tell you the truth, but I said, I'm going to do it. And I got there, and luckily for me, the shoes that he got didn't fit. I couldn't wear them. So I couldn't have them. But I did go up in one of those cherry pickers, and that's me up there. So I did go up, and that was scary enough for me anyway. So anyway, you got to like do what you got to do to get out there and find out what you got to find out. Okay, so there I am. Anyway, but it made a difference. You know what? After that, he was there with me. He was giving me what I needed, and became a very, very successful curriculum. Okay.
You look good in a hard hat, man.
Thank you. Yes. So finally, so the employees, and then the support from the managers and coaches, that's a critical piece as well. Okay. So now, here's another piece about this. How do we make it easier for the managers to play that role? Now, before I go to the enablement piece, I'm going to go into the ecosystem for a second, because I want to share with you a tool that we built. Because what happens is, I'll go into this in a second, but you'll see what happened. We designed this curriculum that include on-the-job learning and all kinds of things, and there was no technology, this is a few years ago, that they could use. The LMS wasn't enough to do what they needed to do. And so we basically, out of this whole process and looking at the technology to support all this stuff, we realized, you know what, in this case, we actually built something for them. And I'm going to talk about one aspect of the ecosystem, the technology, because we built a tool that actually became a product that we're actually now make available to all of you as well. It's called the Trek Learning Experience Manager. And because we wanted to have a learning path, in it's mobile software as a service, that we wanted one that manages and tracks the learning paths that include the formal, informal, and on-the-job learning, critical, provided what we call a nano coaching feedback cycle, which I'll share with you how that works in a minute, to make it easy for the coaches to give feedback, okay? And then the tracking and reporting and accountability, so that they can report back on the real stuff in terms of what's happening and how that correlates to the real world. It's based on XAPI, which is what the standard is. It was one of the first apps that was based on the XAPI. Okay. So the idea behind it is, this is kind of a little diversion, but it's important because it gets it, when we get into the next piece, we'll talk about the learning piece. Because you know what? Some of you might have heard, how many of you have heard of 70-20-10? Yeah, raise your hands. Your virtual hands, okay. And look, 70-20-10, the idea is these numbers are not exact, but the point of it is that most learning only a small part of learning happens through that formal training, okay? Again, that's important, but only one piece of the picture. The rest happens through on-the-job experience, for coaching, right? Think about your own thing that you learned, as we talked about, right? So, but the LMS is really good for managing that first part, the formal training. And some content managers, maybe some of the informal, but the on-the-job is really not handled. And so we built Trek for this client, and then this is years ago, but then it became a product because we needed it to enable the tracking and management of the on-the-job learning and the informal pieces in a systematic way. And now getting back to that coaching that we were just talking about, we created what's called this nano coaching feedback cycle. So what happens is they'll go out in the field, they're going to execute a task, like say, install a device. They take a picture of it, capture what they've done, or done a workshop or whatever. I'm sorry, not a workshop, but a checklist is what I meant to say. Or they take a picture, an audio recording of a conversation. Okay, use the mobile device to capture what they've done. It automatically gets sent to their coach, who can be anywhere else. It may not be with them, okay, anywhere in the world really. And then the coach can give feedback. We can provide performance support and guidance to that coach to give the feedback, to get it back to the learner who's going to reflect on it. Okay, and a key part of the learning cycle. This is the core of the way people learn. People learn by doing, getting feedback, and reflecting on that, and then trying again. That is the nature of how people learn, and this kind of embodies that. When they reflect on it, then they can try it again. And within Trek, we're focused on performance. So if they don't quite have it, let's try it again until the coach says you got it, and then you move on to the next piece. And this cycle is called the nano coaching cycle. It's one example. It's not the only way to do it, but it's a tool that enables us to do what we needed to do based on what we figured out in this learning strategy component. And by the way, now it's available as a software as a service. eLearning Brothers has provided, because when I joined the company, we brought this along. Anyway, so we got that tool. Now we get to us, enablement, okay? That's our job, is to enable all this to happen, okay? And enable the employee to do their job well. And that's kind of a way I like to think about what I do, is provide what is needed for the employee to be able to do their job well, to get the results that the executives want, And so noticing how all those pieces tie together. So we as the stakeholders of that create things like the learning paths that we talked about, okay? And that learning path, it needs to include all the different pieces. And one way I like to look at it, if you just take a look at this idea of the learning path, you can think of that learning path really is the way that people really learn. You might have the formal training, that's important, that's part of it, but then people are going to go through these cycles throughout that learning path, okay? And so you can think of that as setting up real experiences, or it can be simulated experiences, okay? And then the content piece, which we'll get into in a moment, you get the content at the teachable moment. Okay, say, okay, I'm about to do this. That's when you want to be able to link to the content that people need, okay, in performance support or videos or reference, not just in the abstract, not as PowerPoint 3 months before, because there's good evidence that they will have forgotten everything they learned before then. But if you provide it at the teachable moment, three benefits. One, they're gonna remember it. First of all, they're motivated to get it because they need it to solve a problem. Okay. Two, they're going to remember it because they're going to use it right away. And if you use it, you don't lose it, to use a technical term. And third, and most importantly, when you get that content in the context of how you're going to use it, we make mental links between that information and how it's used. So next time you come to a situation where you need to do something, you'll remember that link will be made to that content. And that's how experts, by the way, think about things. Okay. And then we want to track everything, and that's where we use XAPI to track, with Shrek as an example, though, as XAPI to track what people are doing, so that can be stored, and we can do analytics and tie that all together and tie it back to results. So that's an example of how that learning path can be set up.
Something I love about this, Marty, is, in my career, and I know all of us have different experiences, we're the sum of all of our experiences. In my career, often in this world of digital learning, it's really about creating cool e-learning. We have a mandate, as I mentioned earlier, to get some topic out to the masses. Back in my day, it was 5,000 credit card representatives across 5 operation centers nationwide. And so we don't really think much about this type of thing, this guided path to proficiency. As learning professionals, sometimes it's really just about getting it out there. In the best way we can. We want to make it look cool. We want to make sure it runs on an iPad or an iPhone or whatever. Those are important, right? But these pieces that we're talking about, this bigger learning strategy, really does add a whole lot more oomph, if I could use that word. It's not really a word, but it adds a whole lot more oomph to what we're really trying to do. At the end of the day, we're trying to change behavior. So these types of activities that you're describing, where there is practice, there's repeat, there's a repeatable process where I can try something and then try the next task and get feedback on it along the way. I think that's so critical. I know midway through my career, I remember looking at an organization and realizing that we had no coaches in the organization. And some of you may be in that same boat as well. There's a training team, right? You may be part of that training team. The managers are so busy doing a bunch of other stuff, there's really no time for coaching. So the learners, the employees may go through a solution. They may go through a class or take some e-learning or whatever it may be. But it's what you're describing right here, Marty, which is really where the change, the behavior takes place, where people really learn and we track what they're learning. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's such a critical part of everything we're trying to do as professionals. I've loved seeing, and I don't want to get too tangential, but I've loved seeing this evolution of the instructional designer role moving into more of a learning experience designer. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're talking about here. Is not just it's just training. Here's some training. It's about the experience, and then getting feedback on that experience. That's really where change begins to happen. I think as we continue on into this 21st century, our learners are going to be demanding that. I think people going into organizations are going to want to know, how well will you be supporting my performance improvement? We got to be on our game, I think, moving forward. And it's tools like what you're describing here that help us stay on our game. Yeah, so
thanks. Yeah, exactly.
Want to throw in my 2 cents there.
Yep, exactly. So it's those learning experiences in the broader sense that we need to get at. And then there's the content and the tool. We talked about the learning experiences a bunch, and Rich talked about, but then there's the content, okay? Getting that content at the teachable moment, the tools that are going to support, enable and support their doing the job. All of this ties to the employee, right? Mm-hmm. And And I want to just make one comment that I think is very important about content, because there's a lot of content out there. A lot of us focus on content. And, so how many of you have heard of the idea that content is king? You know that expression? Well, okay, I agree, content is king. But if content is king, experience is the emperor. Okay, so it's all about experience, I believe, and then content is to support that experience. And so we focus too much on content, but content is meaningless.
Have more power than kings, is that right?
That's right. Yeah,
it reminds me of Game of Thrones.
An emperor can have lots of kingdoms in it. That's right. It's got a bigger crown too. There you go. So that's a key piece. And so, for example, with Water Quality Association, we were talking about, we had that learning path and that content and teachable moment. They actually had a lot of content. Mostly of it was in books, believe it or not. It was ridiculous. And it was hard to get at. It was old. We refigured that and helped them put that into a knowledge base. It was not part of Trek. It was a separate knowledge base that they can get on their phones to find anything they needed. And then we linked that to the learning path at the teachable moment so they can get the content they need. It's just an example of how we use that. But part of that whole process that we're talking about was taking their content and breaking it up into bite-sized pieces and making it accessible when they needed it, instead of in books that they would never open or use. Okay, so question for you here, and Andrew, here's the last poll question. What percentage of your learning strategy is experience-based as opposed to training-based?
Think about this for a second, guys out there in attendee land. So much of what we do is training based. I remember, well, again, over my career, being excited about getting a SCORM-based LMS in place so we can at least track that people got through our program. Or, they came to my my classroom, my half-day classroom training session, and I could put their name in the as an attendee in the class roster. I can track that they completed it, and then I can track that they got it in a little, maybe a level 2 sort of assessment just to track retention. That's really not much is experience based. So that's why this question is based.
All right, so we'll give you guys just a couple more moments to vote here. Again, you can click right on the screen and tell us if you are experience based or training based. We'll give you a couple more seconds. It looks like lots of you have voted now than before, so now's your chance. Maybe 3 more seconds. 2, 1. All right, so here's those results. 41% of our audience said 20 to 50% is experience-based. 32% said 50 to 80% is experience-based. 18% is less than 20, and 9% is more than 80.
And we had some chatter going on too in the questions panel, Marty, during that, where folks are saying it's kind of hard. It's hard to say. And I love one of the comments here. This really is one of the biggest issues we're facing, which is how do we reinforce this learning? How do we evaluate what's happening? We can give the event, but then how do you really know that it's being consumed and acted upon? I mean, I guess it's the holy grail of our whole industry, right? It's what we're all after.
Yeah. Steve Rosenbaum talks about this too. What happens after the formal training when people are out in the field, he calls that the mystery period. Hopefully, somehow or other, they're going to figure out how to do their jobs or not, and we don't know how long it's going to take. And that's a big part of what we want to do. And so now, and that kind of leads to the next piece here. Is this? So this is kind of, we got to that whole top of all the pieces. You notice how they all fit together, one without the other. I didn't put arrows. You could put a network of arrows across here. It would be like spaghetti, because all these pieces tie together, right? And they all have to be supported. And this is where I want to focus for a second here on the infrastructure piece. So what's exciting to me is that we're in a time where digital technologies are enabling us, are making it possible to do stuff we couldn't do before, to make apprenticeship and coaching available anytime, anywhere, and things like that. And so, but the thing is, though, we have there's so many technologies, so many things out there. I was just at the ATD's Technology Conference. There's a million different things out there. How do you make sense of it? How do you figure out what makes more sense? And you got to start, even with the technology, you got to start up here, okay? But then use things like design thinking and others to figure out what's the best thing for us in our organizations. And we actually do workshops. A colleague and I have done quite a bit of working with organizations and helping them create their digital learning ecosystem. What are the pieces? What do you have? Okay, these are some of the examples of all the different pieces that are out there. Not even all of them. There's a lot others too. How do we put them together in a way that makes sense for your organization in a systematic way that are going to lead to those results and get the goals? And what we've done with organizations is help figure out what is that and how does that work and what are the pieces we have that we can use and what are the additional pieces we need and what don't we need. So that's a key piece, that learning ecosystem, because that supports the entire process. If it's done right, it can be really helpful. If it's done wrong, it can be a hindrance. As some of you might have had some technologies that make it harder. Some people with LMSs, certain LMSs, for example, have made it harder. Sometimes it makes it harder to get done what you want to do. So that's a critical piece. The other piece, I'm not going to talk a lot about this because of time, and this is a whole other topic, but it's critical, is that culture, okay, the context. The culture, because it's creating a learning culture, and this starts from the top, and some of us don't have the power of that, but we can kind of start that process and talk about it. And a lot of organizations are starting to move in that direction and recognize, we have to have a learning organization that's been talked about by Peter Senge years and years ago. How do we make sure that and helps managers make it easy for them and support them in supporting the employees, because that's part of their job. A lot of organizations say they have managers coach initiatives, but managers teacher, managers coach. I always ask this question, how many of you, okay, raise your virtual hands here, how many of you have these type of managers coach initiatives, right? Raise your hands. Okay, now how many of you is it working really well? When I do this live, a lot of people put their hands down. Okay, and so how do we set that up and organize that in a way? How do we take into account the organizational factors? There's political stuff. There's all kinds of things we have to take into account. And if we don't take that into account, and I have a lot of stories where I've made the mistake of not taking that into account, and a great learning plan didn't get implemented or was a total failure not because of the learning design, but because we didn't take into account the organizational factors. Okay, and then how do we make sure what we're doing fits in with the environment that we're in of the organization, our external customers, suppliers, our partners, government regulations, for things like those are all critical pieces that we need to look at. And then finally, we want to look at some of the disciplines that help us. So how do we do all this? Well, we have systematic processes, and we can help you with this. But some of them are based on some things that are really, really helpful. And again, we can do whole workshops on these, and we have and can. The design thinking. So when we do a workshop on learning strategy, or we do a workshop on learning ecosystems particularly, we use a design thinking approach to really get at the core aspects of focusing on the users, focusing on kind of a method that enables us to say, how might we do this? How might we do it differently? How do we use agile and lean? Basically, try things and make mistakes, and not think of it, trying it once and hopefully it works. Thinking of the organization as a system. The learning science piece is a big piece, and I do a lot of work on that area too. Like, how do you make sure we're doing the stuff that actually builds on how people really learn? Showing someone a PowerPoint, there's great evidence that, I'm sorry to pick on your question there, but there's great evidence that shows that is marginal. That's only one little piece of the picture. It doesn't really work. Okay, and how do we, and as Rich mentioned, this learning experience design, I do a lot of workshops I've done for DevLearn and others on learning how to become a learning experience designer and shift from being an instructional designer to someone who designs the entire learning experiences. And that's a big piece of what we want to do. Okay, so here we have basically in a nutshell, in a very short time, kind of a big thing. But as you see, what we found is that this template sort of helps us be systematic about it. And if you can go through these things systematically, which we did with this organization, you can get great outcomes. And with Water Quality Association, they're still using it, and we've had tremendous outcomes because it was done in a very systematic way. It takes time, but then the payoff is really there. Okay. So any other questions? I'm going to a couple more things we're going to talk about real briefly about how we can help you with this. But any questions come up? Is there anything else on the now that you see this big picture that anybody wants to ask?
There's been a few comments along the way, Marty. A lot more that I think we can respond to, especially in the last few minutes here. By the way, we'll share with you our email addresses here in a minute. So certainly some of you may not, we didn't get a chance to really hit on some of the things you were saying. There's been a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of chatter. But I think that some of the key comments that we're seeing, kind of a common thread, is this notion of the results-driven piece, which is the first part of the model there. And then under, are we actually taking the time to identify outcomes and identify the measurements and the analytics? And do we have the support in that performance arena, that second column for manager, coaches, and peers? It's worthy of evaluating and looking and taking a closer look at your organization to make sure that it's something that we can potentially address.
Okay.
So
and what I want to do before we wrap up, one last thing, is can I give you a sense of a couple of quick things? Is that here's some of the services that we can provide, because we can help with this. This is a lot of stuff. A lot of you are working on this in different ways, but there's a lot to it, and we've been really focusing on that. We can help you with this strategy, both in terms of figuring out the competencies and proficiencies, working with experts. We use cognitive methods, what's called knowledge harvesting, to kind of get at their implicit knowledge and how they organize their knowledge. That comes up with very, very valid and actionable proficiency statements. How do we do learning experience design, both workshops and consulting on that? Designing the learning paths in the curriculum, we can help you at that level as well as doing the learning activities. Okay, we can do e-learning and design and development of workshop, simulation, video, AR and VR, as well as the experiential. And then a big piece is that learning technology. The Trek Learning Experience Manager we can provide for organizations that are interested, and glad to show you more about that. Performance support. We have expertise, and we're one of the early pioneers in using Experience API, and can help you with that, as well as how you can use that as a way of tracking. And then this learning ecosystem, these workshops, and figuring out how do you configure your learning ecosystems most effectively, and we can help you with that as well. So those are some of the things that we can do. We're glad to talk more, and glad to share more with you about this stuff and talk about it, and it's exciting stuff, and we're glad to be part of working with you on this type of stuff. So Rich, you want to kind of?
Sure. Yeah, we can wrap up here. And again, I thank you for all of the questions that kind of popped up. Last one Rhonda asked was, really, is the idea about establishing a learning and performance strategy for an organization, and then it just stays the same and in place, even as goals, et cetera, change? And I would say, yeah, that really is the objective. The goals will change, obviously, within an organization, but the methodology and the support that underlies all of it. If you could go back 2 slides just real quick, Marty, back to the model, the strategy, all those pieces, this is really what it's about, is it supports the strategy no matter what happens within the organization.
Right, but this is a dynamic process. It's a good question in the sense too. The strategy, what we do, the strategy has to change. It's dynamic all the time. It changes as things change in the organization, and things are changing all the time. So it needs to be a flexible strategy, and It's not a rigid linear process. And actually, I gave it to you this way. It's a matrix. You may go back and forth to different places and jump back and forth in here, and as a goal or changes, you might change, other things happen, or new technologies become available. So this is actually something that is dynamic. And you're right. If you just create the strategy and put it in a document and then put it on a shelf, it'll stay on the shelf. It's a dynamic process, that strategy. It's a thought process and a series of things that you need to do.
Thank you, Marty. Would you go back to our emails again? I'm going to kick it back over to Andrew, but before I do that, if you would like to schedule a jam session with Marty and myself, where we just spend 30, 45 minutes with you and or your manager or others in the organization, just talking about your learning strategy, that's as an attendee of today's webinar, that's a free service we'd be happy to offer for you. And I think you might find it really helpful just to have a jam session together. So you see our emails here on the screen. Hit up either Marty or myself. We'll be happy to schedule that with you as we tackle the rest of 2019. So thank you, everybody. I'll turn it back over to Andrew.
Yeah, so I'll be sending out an email in the next hour or two, and I'll make sure to include those email addresses there as well, so you don't have to memorize what they were. I do want to take a moment to talk about what's there on the right side of your screen. ELBX Online is coming up. So this is a huge online event where we're going to be doing a webinar a day, where each week is focused on one specific topic. You can go to elearningbrothers.com, and then there at the top it'll say, in the navigation bar, it'll say ELBX. You can click on that and you can learn about our ELBX Online. There's also this year's ELBX Live. We had the inaugural event last summer, and the next one is coming up. So that's on June 10th. It's not too early to register for that. All right, and then there on the left side of the screen, if you want to schedule a demo to look at all of our products, everything we have from our custom side all the way through our templates, you can give us a call at 801-796-2767 or send us an email at info@elearningbrothers.com and let us know what you want to see. And we'll be happy to schedule an appointment to show you what we've got. And like I said, I'll send out those email addresses for Dr. Rosenheck and Richard as well. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. This has been really fun, and thanks everybody for joining us on our webinar. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.